I've got an exclusive interview with Adam and Brady Sadler, the creators of Heroes of Terrinoth, and if you're looking for juicy deets, you are not going to want to miss this interview. Hello everyone and welcome back to the BattleCast. Today I'm joined by the creative minds behind the upcoming action-adventure card game from Fantasy Flight Games, Heroes of Terrinoth. I'm joined by Adam and Brady Sadler. Welcome guys.
Hey,
Hello, thanks for having us.
Lovely to have you. So we'll just jump right into the questions. And first thing first is, are you guys brothers?
Yes, and as our wardrobe will confirm today, we are twins. I guess we happen to wear the same shirts today. So,
we got a lot of these shirts at Gen Con when we were running the Blacklist booth. So,
Hey, you know what? I mean, free
they're
wear is good.
very comfortable.
Yeah, and the twin powers are stronger if you coordinate wardrobes, from what I understand. So, perfect. So what's it like making board games with your brother?
pretty natural.
I was gonna say that reminds me of a question I've been asked my whole life. Is like, what's it like having a twin? It's like I don't know any other way that I've done it.
Yeah, it's true.
Something I'm used to.
And most of the ways we've always created stuff has always been kind of together because every hobby we got into, every creative endeavor, we'd always be driven to create things in that hobby. It's just kind of a natural tendency. We used to be musicians, or we used to listen to music, so we decided to become musicians and started playing board games. Hey, let's make some board games. So we always end up doing things that we're both very interested in. And we just both have that same creative drive.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's nice having a player two ready to go. Why don't you guys tell me a little bit about what your career has been like, how it started in the board gaming industry? We can start with you, Brady.
Yeah, sure. I was started off as a writer actually. I got into writing in a very weird way. Adam and I, like I said, we were both musicians through high school, both metalheads. So we played in a lot of metal bands. I'm a drummer. He's a bass player.
Nice.
And then yeah, after high school, we started touring for some bands and stuff. And I started getting really into kind of obscure to me at the time, like power metal, like European power metal. It was all heavily fantasy driven. And up until that point, I hadn't been really active in like reading or writing. I kind of just, when I was done with school, I was like, all right, I'm done with school. I'm done doing academic things.
Yeah.
And then that kind of music got me into reading. So I started reading a ton of fantasy novels. I decided, hey, like I said before, we always end up doing creating things in the hobbies we love. So I started writing a book and I was working as a janitor while we were doing music. So I was working nights as a janitor at a university. I got cheaper tuition because of that. So I went back to school for my writing degree, started
Nice.
writing. So it was like a big downward spiral from there. And we got into games pretty heavily. So naturally, when I graduated with my writing degree, I put an application in at Fantasy Flight Games. They were calling for writers for, at the time, an unannounced role-playing
Ooh.
project. Yeah, it turned out to be Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which was one of our first gaming loves. We got into Warhammer when we were in high school, and we loved the setting and everything. So I did that, published a few books with them, and then my contact at FFG let me know about a marketing copywriter position, which kind of got me into the company. And I worked in our marketing team for about a year, and Adam joined up with FFG. I'll let him go into that when he tells his backstory. And from there, I transferred over to the creative department with Adam and worked several things before finally we both decided to move on, work corporate jobs, and do freelance game design on our own terms. And that's kind of what brought us today. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a cool work your way up kind of story. That's nice. How about you there, Adam?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of overlap, but I'll kind of fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah.
While Brady was, working as a janitor at a college, eventually, like a semester after he started, I decided to go back to school. I was at a community college to get my grades back up to get into college. So when I was in college, I was working at a puzzle and game company called Mega Brands. It had a local design office, and while I was working there, there was a project that came in for a board game based off the movie Avatar.
Right.
Everybody in the studio was graphic designers. They weren't really board gamers. So me and my friend who worked there, Tom Mason, we all volunteered. We can design this because we play games all the time. So that was kind of my first attempt at a game design. And I found out that it went pretty quickly and smoothly. I was like,
Nice.
oh, maybe I know how to do this.
Got a knack for it, yeah.
And so when Brady was at FFG, I was moving him up over my spring break in college, and there was an opening for a game producer that I applied for, and I interviewed while I was up there, ended up not getting it right off the bat. But a month later, they called me and said they had an opening and they wanted to reconsider me. So I accepted that position. And what got me into FFG games was Descent. That was a big game I played. I was like, oh, cool. It's kind of like Hero Quest from back in the day. So I was into Descent, and when I was working as a producer there, I worked on various projects. But on the schedule, I saw there was an upcoming second edition for Descent, and I was like, I told my manager I have to work on this, and that kind of led me to actually being the designer for Descent. So I worked as a lead designer for that game, which kind of moved me up in the company. I eventually got moved up to managing game designer and was spending more time managing people than designing games. And after my daughter was born, I was like, you know what? I kind of want to, move back to Indiana and try maybe doing some game design on our own. And that led to Brady and I doing Warhammer Quest: The Adventure card game was our first published co-design as freelancers.
That's awesome. It's nice that you were, it's important to do what you love, and managing people is interesting, but I mean, designing board games is, that's pretty sweet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I learned that I'm not good at managing people.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's tricky. The better you get at something, the farther you get away from it in a way. But
yeah.
So I like to ask what games got you into gaming, and what games are you currently really into? I can say Pandemic is what got me into board games, and currently I'm into a trading card game. Despite the cries of my wallet and bank account, it's Lightseekers from Fusion, but it's a good game. How about you, Adam? Awesome. What are you into? What got you into it?
Well, I think Warhammer was kind of like the big gateway for me. I remember one summer we were breaking out old board games when we were in high school, and we were playing Hero Quest, and we naively thought, hey, maybe the game store in town has some copies on the shelf on clearance, even though it was out of print. So when we went to the store, we just saw mountains of Warhammer miniatures. I'm like, this is awesome, and that kind of opened the door to miniatures gaming for me. And that's kind of carried with me. I've always been into hobby games and stuff like that, but one of my passions has always been miniature games, and that still continues today. Where I still play like the new Necromunda and Blood Bowl. Games Workshop games are really my thing, so it's kind of what I've spent a lot of time playing.
And how about you, Brady? What was your gateway game, and what are you into now?
Well, gateway-wise, we had a pretty similar path, Adam and I. So we loved Hero Quest as kids, and then we got into Warhammer. But I think with what really got me pretty much hooked on wanting to do lots of things in games was when I first played Arkham Horror, my first big cooperative game. I didn't really know what a cooperative game was. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, we're all playing together? Cool. Nobody else he's sad because they lost. That pretty much made me only really care about co-ops. Like Adam and I only really design co-ops, and I play other things, but I tend to always just want to buy, collect, and play and design co-op games. And leading up to today, and I always hate using this because I feels like it's kind of tooting our own horn, but I think the game I play the most is probably Street Masters, which is one of our most recent games. We've designed probably a dozen core games, and we care about all of them, but I don't actively play them. But this one I play like almost, if not every day, every other day at least. I tend to game it. So that's probably my current love, and hopefully I'm pretty sure it'll stay that way for a while.
That's awesome. It's a good testament. You're making something you love. So and there you go. That's the proof's in the pudding. Nice. So we know that have been working on Heroes of Terrinoth, but what else have you guys been working on recently?
Yeah, we actually have been doing quite a bit of games we have a lot of games planned with Blacklist Games. That's the shirts we were wearing from Gen Con. Nice. We recently funded a game called Brook City on Kickstarter, which was this summer, and we actually just sent off the files to the printer today, I think. So that's at the printer, getting ready for fulfillment, and it's kind of like a open world heroic cop action game. Anybody who's played like Grand Theft Auto will get the feel of that, but you're not playing as criminals, you're playing as like cops that were inspired from like 80s and 90s action movies.
Yeah, unsung heroes, those guys.
Yeah, that system's kind of built around this modular deck system that we developed for Street Masters, which was our first Blacklist. So the concept is you have a player deck that's your character, you have an enemy deck, which is like the boss and his minions, and you have like a scenario deck that sets the stage for whatever you're doing. So yeah, Street Masters was the first of that type of game, Brook City, and then coming in October 23rd, we have the expansion for Street Masters called Aftershock, and it's going to be everything printed from the first Kickstarter, which was only we only printed enough to back to the to get to the backers. So this will be like a full retail print run, plus the expansion, and the expansion is going to be in a big storage box that holds all of your stuff from wave 1 to 2. So
very nice. And
it's a good way for people who's never played the game to just hop in and get everything.
Yeah, that's perfect. And the first Kickstarter was fairly well received for Street Masters, isn't that right?
Yeah. We were actually surprised. We saw it on the list of Geek and Sundry's top 10 games of 2018.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And how would you, like for those maybe who are here for, their experience with Warhammer Quest, does it translate well to Street Masters? Like, are they similar games? Or?
Yeah, I've read a lot of people, like a lot of the groups I'm on Facebook. I have like a group called like Solo Board Gamers I follow. All these groups where gamers either play solo or co-op games, and a lot of them just now are discovering how much influence from Warhammer Quest, Heroes of Terrinoth is in Street Masters. It's a lot of card gameplay, but just imagine adding decks of cards and miniatures and dice. And
I think dice are a big selling point, because a lot of people are turned off by dice because of randomness. But we have a philosophy with dice where we love dice in our games, usually custom dice, but we always want dice rolls to do something. We hate like misses or oh, you blocked everything, so it's boring. So our dice are typically like, yeah, you're going to do what you want to do, but there's some side effects, or you want to see how well you do. And we also always want to have exploding dice in the game, where like there's always a chance to do something cool.
Absolutely, exploding dice is one of my favorite things from your kind of games, is that there's never a chance, or there's always a chance where you can overcome extreme obstacles. One time, personally, I built a dice tower for Warhammer Quest. I have it beside me, and my wife one time rolled 6 criticals in a row during Warhammer Quest to save the day, basically, and it was just like people are on their feet, so that's cool. And I also like, you're rolling to attack somebody, but you also get a shield too, and you're like, well, I'm not going to say no to a shield. Like, what's what's not? Yeah. So yeah, that's awesome. So for those who are like Warhammer Quest, maybe checking out the Street Masters Kickstarter in October is the thing to do, and it might be just another lovely board game that maybe they haven't heard of. So that's awesome.
And I will say, this is this right here, this Kickstarter coming up is kind of our attempt to try to go full time with games. If it does well enough, Blacklist wants to like bring us on as a full time designers, and we'd love to do more games. And if people like our games, hopefully they'll check it out and maybe support it, and lead to more Sadler games.
Well, I'll have the link to that Kickstarter in this description, and people can be prepared for when it launches, and I'll definitely be taking a look. It sounds pretty sweet.
Thanks, man.
So let's see. So the reason we're here is to talk about Heroes of Terrinoth. Why don't one of you guys just kind of give us a summary of what Heroes of Terrinoth is for those who maybe don't know what it is?
Sure. It is Heroes of Terrinoth is a cooperative adventure card game of I like to say it's a small box with a big experience. It doesn't have a huge footprint on your table, and it's very, very much inspired by Warhammer Quest, the adventure card game. So players who played that game and liked it are probably going to like Heroes of Terrinoth, even though there are some changes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely, I have 2 of my favorite games are Warhammer Quest, and then also Gloomhaven, and one of them, takes 2 people to lift, and one of them you can hold in your hand, yet they both provide a very good experience. So I do really think that big footprint small footprint, big experience is very true. Awesome. How long have you guys been working on Heroes of Terrinoth for?
It was, I think, I always forget the date, but we...
It was actually fairly quick.
whenever that license announcement happened, we probably hit the ground running immediately when we were getting green light for it. And it was even though we had a green light, the schedule, the way scheduling works, it's never a guarantee when things fall into release and when they hit the development queue.
Right.
So us personally, like I remember when we got the green light, Adam was pretty much redesigning all the cards immediately while I was finishing up Street Masters, because we had to get that to print also. So it's kind of like happening at the same time. So yeah, I think that was probably, was that the same time, Adam, or was it like?
Yeah, we juggle a lot of. That's one thing good about having a team, a design team here, is we can juggle projects. But I think that when we signed the contract, compared to when we delivered our final prototype, I think it was a span of a couple months, maybe. Like it wasn't very long at all, because we kind of knew what we wanted to do. We knew we had a system that worked. And
you've got it all up in your head. You're thinking about it, and then you get the green light, and you're just like, let's put it on paper. Yeah, nice. So Heroes of Terrinoth isn't the first cooperative board game you guys have created. Obviously, you helped with Descent. Street Masters is, it's teamwork or solo play. What makes these cooperative games so special to you guys?
I think for me personally, it's always been a certain lack of competitiveness that I have. Like, I can be competitive and to have fun and like make a good play experience for my opponent. But there's always been a thing in my experiences when I was younger as a gamer. I didn't like seeing dominating somebody else and then like being sad or frustrated or upset. And it wasn't until I discovered games like Arkham Horror where I found out we could like explore this game system together and like face these challenges together where like we might lose but then we'll have a good story to tell and we're not like sad because one of us beat the other one. So for me, I think it's always just been fascinating because my lack of competitiveness made it so a lot of games were less approachable for me.
Yep.
And then cooperative games made it so I can get obsessed with these games because I'm not competing against somebody else. I'm just like learning how this AI system works and discovering a story, and that's always been much more appealing to me.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not the only one. I mean, definitely, I think traditionally, firstly, board games have come such a long way since the times of Monopoly, and I think a lot of people still have PTSD from Monopoly games where they just get absolutely destroyed, and so they don't realize that there are games out there where everybody wins, everybody loses. Worst case scenario, maybe you learn a great story, and as you say, there's no better way to introduce somebody to board gaming than working together. Going to someone's house who owns the game basically means you're going to be beaten by them because they have more experience. But in a co-op game, it means they're going to be able to help you win, which is quite nice. So
yeah,
I agree.
And I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of people that have played our games might have noticed that we're kind of big on theme too. Like we like doing thematic games, and we usually work in a lot of themes that are lend itself to cooperation. Like a bunch of heroes teaming up against some big evil. Like we just have that knack for theme, and it also lets you focus more on like narrative and stuff like that, where you can tell a story with your friends.
And all those years when we were kids on the couch playing two-player NES games really made us focus on the people have against an oppressive AI system.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it also presents a design challenge too, like from the nerdy design side of things, where designing a co-op game, you're kind of designing two games. Designing the player experience plus an AI that drives it.
Absolutely.
So you have to kind of juggle that. When you're designing a competitive game, you're kind of just designing this neutral system that everybody plays with and tries to win with. So it's a little more challenging design-wise.
Are there any game designers that have inspired you in your creative process with Heroes of Terrinoth or just other games in general?
I think in general, there's two main designers. I think the first one, because I don't always associate my favorite games with their designers, but designers like talking to them outside of the games they worked on, just about the industry, about their experience.
That's
the one person that always comes to mind is Richard Lanius. Not only because I mentioned Arkham Horror was a big turning point for me, but he's kind of just been this massive mentor for me and Adam. Like every time we meet him at conventions, we're actually co-designing a game with him.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so that's been a dream come true as well. Working with like him, so he's definitely one of the guys I looked up to the most. He's like my board game father figure. Really.
Nice. And how about you there, Adam?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. We've played a lot of Lanius games. It's definitely kind of inspired us in the co-op realm of things. As far as my working process, one guy who made a big impact on me was when I was at FFG. Alessio Cavatore came into I forget what the word is they use. Basically, like give his advice on a game. Consultant. Yeah. There you go. Bam! I was just taking a blank there. He came in as a consultant for a war game. And I think it was Dust Tactics that I was working on at the time, and so he was going through the rules and stuff like that. And he made this big point where anytime any minor thing changes in the rules, you don't just make a note of it. You go and you have a new draft of the rulebook printed out and have it with you. And while you're playing, you always reference that rulebook so you know you're playing by the rules, not just what's in your head. And so anytime Brady and I work on a game, the first thing we do is try to write a rulebook. When we're playtesting it, we don't just assume what we think. We make sure it's actually in the rules. We wrote it down. Because it's always important to know how people interpret your games, not just what's in your head. So that's a big deal for us.
Yeah, one of the most common theories you hear people saying, "Oh, writing rulebooks is so hard." And it's like it's true because if you wait till the last minute, it's going to be a lot harder to remember all those little things. But if you have it writing in the process where you're always constantly tweaking it, it's so much more manageable. It might not be perfect, but at least it's going to happen information in there, you know.
But I like that you've just talked about, who your favorite designers are, not necessarily from the games they make, but from what they've, the mentorship. That's kind of an aspect I never considered. I'm always expecting, I like them because I like their game, but I like that I like them because they're a nice person and helpful. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the art and the universe of Heroes of Terrinoth. So for those who don't know, Terrinoth is Fantasy Flight's own fantastical world. It's got rich lore and an evolving lore. How do you think the Terrinoth universe lends itself to this game system that you guys have?
I would say perfectly. Like I think it's a perfect fit because it's while it might not be as developed and have the time to cook as Warhammer Quest or Warhammer has, like Warhammer setting is so rich and vibrant, but it's been around since the early 80s or late 70s or whatever. But Terrinoth is kind of just now hitting its stride where they're trying to develop more. Like if the Rune Wars rulebook has more lore in it, there's the new role-playing game. They're kind of fleshing it out more. But it's like an open canvas of fantasy. You can kind of do so much with it. But there are also so many existing characters that people can recognize. Like, oh, I played this character in Descent, or I played this character in Rune Wars. So it's kind of the perfect transition, I think, for the game.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find interesting is a lot of because I follow a lot of chatter online, which is can not always be a good thing when it comes to fantasy.
Yeah, true.
But a lot of people have this common thing to say, oh, it's just generic fantasy, which I never really understood, like what that meant, and B, what the negative connotation was, because in my mind, I if that's what generic fantasy is, I like that because it's got a lot of imagination. It's got a whole like almost like a sandbox of items to play around with. So it may not have this like individual hook you have about some kind of world that has some special scientific rule about it that makes it unique.
Yep.
But I mean, when you have a fantasy world it looks good, it's vibrant, it's colorful, it's got all kinds of different interesting characters. I don't really understand why that's A, considered generic, and B, considered a bad thing.
No, and the internet is not known for its compliments and its nice, gentle phrasing. But I will say, having read Terrinoth lore, that it's actually got some really cool stuff going on. People don't realize, you've got elves going on and you're humans, but once you get to the Uthuk side of things, there is some really interesting stuff going on over there. So that's cool. I have a question from a viewer, Shane Anigans. He says, did you or Fantasy Flight Games discuss using a different license, such as Netrunner or L5R or any other IPs they own in regard to this revamp here?
While there were discussions about what to do with the game, the future of the game, we did feel like, I think everybody agreed involved in the conversation, that Terrinoth made the most sense because it's, for example, Warhammer Quest didn't have time to develop into whatever it was going to be, and so Terrinoth is basically like, okay, well, let's try another version of this game that's still similar. Fantasy's it's still fantasy, so it just made the most sense to take it to Terrinoth. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a pretty nice transition, absolutely. So in regards to Warhammer Quest, we kind of talked about the established lore that Warhammer did. Did you find that this, established lore, this was maybe a little more constricting when you were designing Warhammer Quest?
Yes, but I think it's more on the licensing side of things.
There's a weird barrier with just the business side of things and the bureaucratical things where, for example, GW has a vision for what they want Warhammer Quest to be, because in their head it was an underground game. You fought in these dank places and fought monsters in the dungeons, which is great. People love that. But when we came up with some concepts for Warhammer Quest, where it's like, oh, you can go trek from this town to this town over these mountains, they didn't want that in the game because that's not what Warhammer Quest is. So there are certain limitations because because those things exist in the IP, obviously, but it's not necessarily what they want in that product, the Warhammer Quest brand. So
I mean, Warhammer Quest, the original board game, was a dungeon crawling adventure game. Like all the map tiles were dungeons. So I totally understand that they wanted to keep that IP of what it was. So it did change our design, but you'll notice in Heroes of Terrinoth, like one of the easier quests in the game, the one we suggest to start with, takes place at a roadside inn where some goblins attack. So it's kind of like traditional RPG starting session type game.
Classic. So, door opens to inn.
Goblins attacking, save us.
Exactly. But yeah, that's great. I definitely, nothing against the Warhammer Quest, great game, but at the same time, I definitely felt like claustrophobic at times. Just do the sheer hours spent. You're like, okay, now we're in the sewer, now we're in the mine, now we're in the, you're like, oh, okay, like there's
What
no
other dark locations
take your
can there be?
vitamin D pills, people, because there's no sunlight down here. Yeah. So in Heroes of Terrinoth, are we going to see any characters that we've seen from other Terrinoth games?
Yeah, you'll notice definitely from the hero side of things, and this has been seen in some of the previews. Obviously, the heroes have been recurring heroes throughout other Terrinoth games, and one specifically, a kind of a newer hero to the brand was the scout from Rune Wars. I was always him accidentally, but
Terry
Wraithstalker?
Wraithstalker, yeah.
Wraithstalker, yeah. So yeah, she's going to be appearing in the game. So there are recurring ones from like Descent and Runebound, and also new ones to the universe that came from Rune Wars.
On the other side of the coin, the monsters, like you'll see a lot of monsters from Descent appear in the game, but also there are villains that are just new, like new characters that will be added to the game. So hopefully those will appear in other Terrinoth games in the future.
That's kind of cool, the idea of making, as you say, it's an evolving lore, making this lore kind of come to flesh. It's really cool.
I will say that I was very excited to see that two characters that Brady and I made specifically for Descent appeared in Heroes of Terrinoth, which we didn't know was going to happen, which is awesome. But when I was working on Descent, Brady is obsessed with halflings and gnomes and little short people in fantasy. He loves it. So he insisted on having a gnome in Descent. That's where Tomble came from. So he kind of just like wanted that to happen. And the other one was Averick Albright was my contribution, because I always play clerics or paladin type characters.
They were essentially our D&D characters that we want to bring into the world. So.
But you'll see that old Descent had like kind of three classes sort of. It had the warrior, the thief, and the mage, and I really wanted to bring the healer in. So that's kind of was something that I pushed for early on Descent. And so that's where the healer class came from. And Averick Albright was kind of like that's the character I want to play.
That's so cool.
We used to have that thought process where they thought the healer should be combined with the mage, and like since Adam's background is he's always a cleric and always a healer, like, those are two different things.
Those are separate. I mean,
you gotta have that support character.
You do. I'm sure there's some people who are going to be watching this interview who just like would love to manifest their D&D character into a game. I mean, what a dream come true. That's awesome. Well, hey, I mean, if I'm going to be playing Tomble and he sucks, I know who to blame, I guess. So.
Exactly.
No, it'll be good, I'm sure. So Terrinoth and its art style are very unique and actually quite contrasting to Warhammer, very bright. Do you think this adds to its approachability or its playability at all?
I think it does. I think there's a wide audience that Warhammer Quest has that likes the grimdark fantasy. I mean, obviously it's something that attracted Adam and I to the setting when we first got into games. But I think Terrinoth, I prefer it personally. I like colorful things. I like a wider palette, colors, and I like vibrance. And I think that is a big approachability thing. Where if you have Warhammer Quest on the shelf, like let's say at Target or something, it might not draw as many people as the Terrinoth box would, because it's got that vibrant battle scene. It's all colorful and exciting. So it's a preference thing, I think. But I think it is more approachable for a wider base.
And I'll say that I'll probably say this a lot in this interview, but I love Warhammer. Like I grew up with the IP Warhammer, and the old world is very, very dear to me. But I enjoy playing Heroes of Terrinoth more, and that's not just because it's an evolution of the system. Like it still plays similar enough that they feel the same. But Terrinoth, the art style and everything just feels like high adventure, and it's kind of over the top, and it's so, like I said before, it's such an open setting. You can do so much with it. That I really enjoy playing in that setting. So
definitely, and just looking at some of the spreads we've seen from Fantasy Flight Games, my eyes are. I like color. I think colorful is a powerful tool to differentiate what's happening, and I felt with Warhammer Quest, fair enough to the experienced board gamer, it's fine. But if you have some new people playing, green is scout, blue is healer, like it makes sense to your brain, and so I think that's really cool. I will say, though, for those who are watching, that Terrinoth, even though it does look maybe a little cartoonish or a little colorful, it's got some hardcore stuff going on. As I say, the Uthuk savages, they are ripping things apart and grotesque, yes. Multiple orifices, I mean, you name it, they got it.
It's not out, that's for sure.
Yeah.
There's definitely sinister stuff in the setting. I mean, it is colorful, but yes, there are some serious tones to the story.
Awesome.
One art piece strikes me in particular, where there's a scene where one of the heroes is walking out of a bar fight, and you see in the foreground there's his victim with an axe buried in his back. So it's not subtle.
So Terrinoth, the universe itself, is a very big place, and we've kind of touched on this a little, but where Warhammer Quest was very, centralized in this dungeon area, are we going to be able to travel across Terrinoth? Are you going to kind of take us for a bit of an adventure?
Yeah. That was the idea behind it, because that's one of the things I was most excited about with this transition to Terrinoth, because there's more to explore than just underground and different types of roof buildings and everything. So and plus the quest system itself is so open to like abstraction in different ways, where you could have a quest that's focused on a few moments in a battle, or a quest that's actually a month-long travel from point A to point B. So you can have these different quest designs within that system. And now that we have the thematic means to visit wider areas and travel above ground and do other things, it opens up a lot of design space, which we're really excited.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I mean, you can make dungeons work, but at the same time, Terrinoth, it's a big place, and I think they released that game mat which has the full map. So I think it's going to be kind of cool if you're like, we are in this place, and you're like, oh, it's right down here, or like, oh, it's up in the northern area of Terrinoth. So I think that's going to be nice, and for those who aren't maybe quite at the level where they're going to play the Terrinoth role-playing game, this might be a nice way to kind of see what the world's like.
Yeah, sure. And just to make a point about how we're not always sure about FFG's plans for everything, is the mat was actually a surprise to us. We didn't know that was coming, and that was like just as much of a surprise to us as everybody else. And we're glad to see that they're have plans on providing more things for the game. So it's pretty awesome.
There were various opinions on the mat when it was announced. People saying useful look and everything, but I'll say as the creators, when we saw it, it's like, wow, let's design a campaign. So because that was just so inspiring, seeing that huge map layout. It's like I want to play a campaign on that mat. So it's like it gives us tons of for expansions and stuff.
It's totally functionable.
Yeah, it's kind of the functionality will come out in time, I guess. But I will say from experience that when I started playing on Neoprene, things just improved by 100%. You're no longer moving your miniatures across like an oak table. It's like just like and the dice rolling on Neoprene. I mean, come on, it's good.
You're never sliding cards around trying to pick it up.
Exactly. Yeah, people. It's the subtle things,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about gameplay and the mechanics. So in Warhammer Quest, you kind of the game was essentially a 5-part quest chain where one quest led into quest number 2, into quest number 3. Is that something we're going to see in Heroes of Terrinoth?
This one will be probably one of the more controversial changes of the game. I personally really like it, but in Heroes of Terrinoth, the core set now has 8 quests in it, and those quests function very similar to like the Delve quest in Warhammer Quest. So they're not tied to a campaign. Every quest is a one-off adventure where you can level up and improve your character within that one adventure. And when you play the next quest, you just start all over.
And a self-contained story, which is important to note.
Yes.
Yes. Very, very comprehensive little stories. So.
Right.
So they're not tied to each other, so you can play them. Now, what this does, I think, is it provides a nice starting point for the game, where if FFG continues to do anything with it, it's very easy to do something like the Warhammer Quest system, like a campaign expansion in the future that would tie quests together. But the core set now has, I think, way more replayability, because I think that was the biggest complaint about Warhammer Quest was content. Like you played through the campaign, and campaigns take up a lot of components to a game. So most of the components in that Warhammer Quest box were for that campaign. And so once you played through it, you're like, okay, I can do the delve now, I guess, but there's one delve,
That's a good point.
That core game is such a better foundation for the system, because not only does it provide more content out the gate, but if we were allowed, on our terms to make expansions, like if we pitch ones, it'd be, well, this campaign has these types of rules for the campaign where you're traveling, you have to track your food and your illnesses and stuff.
Yeah.
While this campaign is you're traveling through this dark tower and you have to track floor you're on. So like each campaign would have its own types of rules associated to it.
Very cool.
It allows for that with that expandability without making too many exceptions, because if you expand it upon Warhammer Quest, everyone campaign would have to have these exceptions to those rules, as opposed to just building new rules from the ground up. So.
And that's a great point. So we're kind of, we're starting in a place that is easily expanded upon, and although some people may be wanting that campaign experience, I mean, hey, things permitted, we might see ourselves in a campaign expansion coming at some point. So
yeah, I will say we would definitely be happy to do something like that in the future. Again, since we have no idea like what the plans for the game, because I mean, anybody who plays FFG games know that if a game does well, they typically do more stuff for it. So if Heroes of Terrinoth sells well, then we might be looking at a future for the game. So hopefully it does as well as Warhammer Quest.
And you're kind of on the, you're almost on, the building of a wave, in the sense that, with Warhammer in general, if a game doesn't do well, they're just like, well, oopsie. But with Terrinoth, like there's a push to make this universe something more, and so in that regard, I mean, that can only help you, I guess. This game is going to really help promote that. So that's awesome.
What I did learn working at a publisher was that something I never thought about as a consumer is that by default, any game line, expansions will always sell less than a core game. So a core game has to do really well to, budget for expansions, I guess.
Absolutely, that's a good point. Yeah, some people say they're only going to buy a game if expansions are released, but you might actually be negatively influencing what you want.
I've actually seen comments like that about Heroes of Terrinoth that are saying, "Oh, I'll wait to see if there's some expansions." Well, that might not happen if everybody does that.
It's your
like
fault,
the
Jeremy.
same mentality you see on Kickstarter, where somebody is like in the comments saying, "I backed it a level. I'll raise my pledge if it does better." It's like, well, if you raise your pledge, it would do better.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. One thing I'll touch on with this, this, as you guys just said, this kind of quests being their own thing, you level up within the quest, and when it's done, it wraps up nicely, is, I will say from experience, I actually have my sheet here for some reason. These are all of my quests I've done with people for Warhammer quests. We've got all our items we did, and let me say, of the 20 or 30 campaigns I started, I've probably finished like 5, so it really takes a dedicated crew to get the whole experience, whereas it might be kind of nice to start a quest, finish the quest, be like, we did it, guys, and that's great. It's not like 1 of 5 and you just forget about it. So
yeah, I definitely think that having a campaign as like an option later on, it makes more sense because you can get more plays first by just doing one-offs. Campaigns definitely demand a lot out of players, a lot of time, and with so many games out there these days, it's hard to devote that much time to one game. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's just a superior choice as a product model, because it wasn't something we had total control over, but we're happy with the result. Is having this core set be the way that it is. It's a much better choice than just having a box devoted to a campaign with very little like one-off play. Now you have a lot of one-off play with the ease of adding a campaign will be totally feasible in the future. So
people fear change, but I can already see I can see my friends being more excited about this unique quest system. One of the things I loved about Warhammer Quest was the quests could vary quite a bit. In the first quest, you're basically trying to like fend off odious grump while you try and progress to the last location. But in one of the other quests, you're trying to decrease the level of poison in the atmosphere that's slowly killing you. So there was quite a variety of what you were doing with these quests. Are we going to see a variety of quests in Heroes of Terrinoth?
Yeah, the eight in the base game are just so different, and they're so unique in their themes and their mechanics. And one I like to reference a lot is, I won't spoil this too much because it's I'm sure they'll be talked about in one of the previews, or maybe, I don't know. But there's one where you're in this battle with a bunch of Decon lords, and they have this army split up into these groups and trying to defend different locations. And location is a different like event on the peril track, so you have to choose as a group where you want to travel each turn to go. You want to go defend, or where you want to go hang out during that battle, because only one of those spaces lets you like level up, lets you up cards. It's like the town where you're resting and recovering and recouping and everything, but have enough success tokens to actually pay for that. So you have to make enough progress on not success tokens, but progress on the location, right, Adam?
No, I thought that one. I'll have to look at that one again.
There's 2 different ones. So there's, as you call, there's lots of diversity because quests function but yeah, that's an example of instead of just progressing on the peril trap, you're choosing where to go and what's going to benefit your group the most against the waves of enemies. So.
Yeah, because one of the things about the peril track in Warhammer Quest was essentially on the left side you were in the cool, and the right side you were going to die imminently. But here you're basically saying now that actually isn't the case necessarily. It's location specific, so you're jumping around locations, which, I mean, what a great adaptation. That's awesome.
Yeah, the peril track is very open to mess with, to do different things with. Like that's a great example. I mean, the one I was talking about, the goblin attack, that one's more traditional, where it just keeps getting worse and worse. So we have that standard there, but the quest design is pretty open with that peril track. You can do a lot of stuff with it.
Good way to introduce people. I'll just briefly touch on the leveling up that you mentioned. You say that if you have enough success, you level up. What does it take to level up, and how do you get leveling up? What do you need for it?
So that's it's a very quest specific, where that was a good example of how that one works. But sometimes it might just be like you hit this event and it's like, okay, well now everybody's leveling up because things are progressing, getting harder, and you need to be able to adapt to it. So it's very quest specific. There's no like set way to do it, and that also lends to the expandability with it. So it's like if we want to do it a different way in the future, you can. If you ever want to do a campaign for the game, it can be more like Warhammer Quest.
Absolutely. It makes sense to me. The going to town mechanic in Warhammer Quest, although fine, was, I don't know, it felt fine, but it felt functional. But I think putting different ways to level up, I mean, it can only add more playability, really.
I do find it more exciting to happen during a quest. Like it's when you're doing stuff, you get like immediate like upgrade. It's like, oh, this I'm going to do so much better on this turn because of this. And I will also tap on the preview that we saw on FFG's website. Since there are 4 archetypes and each one has 2 different classes, those kind of let you tailor your character how you like. So I think in that example they had a mage, and if their party was lacking a scout, they could choose the Geomancer, which kind of has a better explore option. I know a lot of people have been talking online about how, the Geomancer explore card is just clearly better than the Runemaster's explore card. Yes, that's true. But the Runemaster has other cards too that are probably better than the Geomancer. So you have to look at the whole class, and once you make that choice, you're locked into that class.
Of course. So it's a big choice, and that's exactly right. As we're looking at one of 4 action cards, and as far as we know, the attack or the aid of that Runemaster would be far superior to that of the Geomancer. So that's very cool. That's an interesting mechanic. One of the things I liked about Warhammer Quest was this almost like negative legacy aspect. Specifically, I'm thinking of like the Warpstone or Odious Grump. When you fail a mission or something, it sticks around. Just given the fact that quests are unique entities, are we going to see any transferring or not really?
Not from between the actual quests in the base game, but you'll see that within quests. You'll see, so it's less of a legacy campaign aspect, but within the quest you'll see your decisions matter, obviously, and how results depending on what you do early on toward the end. So there'll be important choices. But again, that's something that keeping in mind, like when campaigns are introduced, if we have our say, obviously, then we can do all kinds of things like that on a grander scale than what was in like Warhammer Quest, for example.
That's awesome. Just touching on here, character progression now. So there's 4 archetypes in this game. Can you kind of just like talk about what they are, what they're about?
Yeah. So the 4 archetypes, anybody who played Descent, they'll be very familiar with these. There's the warrior, who excels at taking damage, protecting their allies from enemies. There's the scout, who excels at mainly exploration, also damage, sometimes range damage. The healer, which is all about keeping people alive. They can hold their own in battle, but they're all about healing and doing support stuff. And the mage is pretty much in charge of damage. Mainly, they excel at like multiple target damage.
Nice.
Crowd control, as we call it. So yeah, those are the archetypes in the game, and every archetype in the core game has 3 heroes assigned to those archetypes. So there are 12 heroes in the core game, which is obviously cooler, way more than Warhammer Quest, which is pretty awesome.
Now, are the heroes all accessible when you buy the game, or are they unlocked, or how does that work?
Yeah, you'll have a cast of all 12 characters to choose from.
Oh, cool.
And the cool aspect about those are each individual, I think you might have touched on this already, Adam, each individual hero has their own unique ability that makes it different within that archetype. So, like, for example, Tomble, he has an ability to spend a success token to ignore an enemy die roll, so he's like hiding. It's really cool. It kind of captures his feel and also makes him unique to the other heroes.
Yeah.
Also touches on one of the new changes from Warhammer Quest was instead of assigning these success tokens to these activation cards, you're just collecting a pool of them to use for various things. I think is it still a limit of 5, right?
Yeah, you can have up to 5. You can only commit up to 2 per action.
And
Right.
is it a party pool or is it a
No,
character pool?
Yeah,
That-
and that
is
also it acts as this whole like almost energy system where you're using it for to cancel negative effects if you can spin them to cancel an effect, or some hero might use them like Tomble to affect die rolls. So they have a lot of different uses, and I think it has a better feel than having to make this commitment on putting them on certain cards
Totally.
as opposed.
I was going to add it on even outside the 8 action. I feel like they happen more often in this game. Like the Disciple, for example, can pass them out quite a bit.
That's
so
awesome.
success tokens encourage you to use them more often.
Very cool. And so you're saying Disciple. Can we know what the subclasses are for the archetypes? Do you know?
Sure. The healer, we'll go first because they're the best. They have Disciple and Spirit Speaker. Disciple's kind of like the cleric, like the holy warrior kind of guy. Spirit Speaker is more like a druid. And they each have their own specializations, obviously. The mage has Rune Master and Geomancer. We know that. The scout has Thief and Wildlander.
Yeah, the Wildlander's obviously more focused on like ranged combat and like survival, and the Thief is more focused on exhausting enemies, tricking people, that kind of thing.
And then the last one is
Warrior has Knight and Berserker.
yeah, and that's awesome. Berserker Knight, you know what the difference is there off the name. I did see in the preview from Fantasy Flight that the rogue or thief or whatever it is has a human body shield or something like that, and I mean that just has me so excited because I mean I don't know what it does, but one can only assume the enemy is getting peppered by their allies, I guess, which is a kind of interactive mechanic we haven't seen.
That one took quite a few iterations, and I believe that the dev team at FFG kind of worked out a simpler way to work it. So obviously, the development team of FFG always deserves a lot of credit for the work they do. After we submit a game, they kind of take it to play testing, get feedback, polish it off, add some cool things. Like for example, the heroes having individual abilities. I love it. But that was totally an addition they put into that game, which was awesome.
That's cool.
We didn't know they were going to have that many heroes. We're like, that's awesome because we just designed 4 and Quest.
As a publisher, because we work with a lot of different publishers. As a publisher, one thing FFG's development team is really good at is they take complete ownership of things, not like a domineering way, but because they want it to be as good as possible. So they pretty much treat it like their own thing, and which is good because their passion comes out that way. So
and as up and coming game developers, it's educational experience to do something, have them do something, and then kind of think about like why did they do that? Is that better? I don't know.
It is a whole different mindset. I will say that I've learned that I'm not the best developer. I think Brady and I are good at coming up with new ideas, but like sometimes those ideas need polished, and developers are really good at that. They're really good at taking an idea to the finish line.
It's a separate job. Yeah, it's a totally different mindset because when you're coming up with the ideas, it's a lot of work just to think about these things and put them to paper and make them actually work. And it's a whole other thing to have an editor come in, which is essentially what they are. They're like this, elaborate editor, and say, well, I know you like this a lot, but this sucks. Get rid of this. That kind of stuff.
I think that takes a team to really bring one of these ideas to light. Awesome. You talk about a healer, and I'll just touch on it because in Warhammer Quest, of course, we had the warrior priest who sort of just seemed like he sort of just kicked ass, and if he could help you, maybe he would, but like not really. So is this healer, are we gonna like real healing, like full on?
I will say that the warrior priest was kind of my first introduction to like priest type characters in gaming because, like, as I said, I got into Warhammer, so warrior priests were always like a big deal to me when I was younger. As I got into gaming more, I got more into like real healers, stuff like that. And Warrior Priest has always more been about battle. So like when I designed the initial Warrior Priest for Warhammer Quest, it was much more like the Disciple, being, more of a healer. And Games Workshop was like, oh, well, that's cool and all, but like Warrior Priests of Sigmar are kicking demon butt and undead and everything, and the priests of Shalia in the Warhammer setting were the healers.
Right.
So there wasn't like full on healing in Warhammer Quest. It's like little subtle things.
Very subtle.
And Heroes of Terrinoth, I think everything is kind of like turned up a little bit. Healing is, the damage is, everything's kind of more over the top. So it feels like lots more things going on. But the Disciple, if you go, the healer class in general, like the archetype, is a support class. But if you go Disciple, you're going to go super healing.
I like that, because in Warhammer Quest it kind of felt like the best offense was a good defense, basically for everybody. But here, I mean, I would love for my ally to, well, I wouldn't love, but if he took like 5 damage, but then I could heal like 4 damage, I mean, like that feels like a big deal, especially when 5 damage is like half their health.
Yeah, it is also important to note that in Heroes of Terrinoth, you can actually have all 4 of your cards exhausted. So even your rest card, that is what typically stands everything back up again, that one, if you ever start your turn with all the cards exhausted, you'll suffer 2 damage, and then everything will refresh. Now, that sucks, but it also, as Brady and I had a situation come up in a recent playthrough, it was actually beneficial for him to just exhaust all his cards and just refresh them all next turn, because I could heal the damage off of them. So it's like, yeah, go all out, I'll take care of you. So
it just wouldn't work out that well, I should say. You won't have the right situation set up. We were like, I was playing the I think it was the Rune Master, and they always benefit from exhausting extra cards to do more damage and stuff. So I was like, well, I'll exhaust everything, and then you can just heal me.
No, I mean, that's really cool. One thing I think about with Warhammer Quest is, each character refreshed based on something else. And I remember the Way Watcher just always refreshing off the attack, and I remember just always attacking, and so it kind of just seems like nothing's changing on your board, whereas this idea of the rest definitively refreshing, you're going to see a little more choice being made, I guess you could say.
Yeah, which is how it was always meant to be. Originally, that was the first design pitch for Warhammer Quest. The effect of the rest was to stand your cards up. And there was this decision where it's like, well, we should mix it up and put it, because I think that there was this fear that, oh, no one's going to want to just do the boring rest because all this stand your stuff back up. But it became more important after that change. So going into Heroes of Terrinoth, they're like looking at that again. It's like, well, what real benefit are we getting from mixing up these refresh actions? And also, is it worthwhile to not let that be exhausted? Because that takes away some of the effects from like the enemy cards and the
and there's a condition now that exhausts cards, so it makes that easier as well.
And that's a great point, because I always remember being in a situation where, like, the enemy, I can see he's going to exhaust me in Warhammer Quest, so I'm like, well, I might as well just leave my unexhaustible card up, and yeah, I kind of felt like that mechanic was, you cheated a little bit. So here, if they're going to exhaust you, you're going to take some damage and probably get your butt kicked. So good. I noticed on the map that Fantasy Flight had produced, there's no item area on it. Are there items in this game?
Yes, there are items, but they are in the exploration deck now. So it's not a separate gear deck. That way, if you draw an exploration card that's a potion, you just take it. You don't have to, oh, it's got an item thing, so I draw an item. They kind of just combine them together. That kind of gives you a little more options when you're building the exploration deck, and also makes exploring a little bit more exciting, I think.
True.
And it makes them more consumable. Like, items are mostly consumable in this game. So.
Yeah, in my mind too, it removed this kind of redundancy almost in the game, where you would draw this card and it would say, oh, you found a gear, so you draw this other card. And I mean, that was kind of almost a necessity with this whole campaign-driven aspect.
You're right.
And this, not to say this won't be introduced in a different way in the future, who knows? But having just that exploration deck from the foundation, I just think it's so much more elegant and so cleaner, and it kind of an excitement of whether I got to draw that little item you need, or you might be drawing enter.
It does kind of make sense to me. I definitely remember, like, an ally just constantly getting the coin cards, and you're like, damn it, like, why are you always getting these, but now you just get the item, which makes sense. You're exploring, you might find an item, so that makes sense. Less decks. This question is from a guy Pericator on the Fantasy Flight forums. He says, obviously some heroes will work well together with certain other heroes. Gamers love to find powerful combinations and synergies. What was it like trying to balance the hero abilities and traits for virtually any combination?
Yeah, most credit is due to the development team, because what we did internally with the initial content design was make a base level almost. So everything, there was nothing super too powerful or unpowered. Just try to make everything base level where it could build from there. So make it function, and then luckily, like I said before, the development team at FFG is really good at taking ownership and giving it enough love. So
well, they also have a big playtest pool. We're limited to us and our few friends who are willing to playtest our games, which we appreciate.
Pick me,
but
pick
we
me.
don't. It basically soaks up our game night. So if we have games we want to play, we're like, oh sorry guys, we're going to playtest one of our games. Like, oh okay. So it's kind of like work sometimes, but you do what you have to do. So we kind of do trial and error. We just make sure that stuff we're designing is fun. That's the biggest thing for us, is make sure it's fun and in line with things, and then when we pass it off to FFG and they send it to the playtesters, they get a much bigger sampling of play experiences, so they can kind of refine it as needed. And I will say that seeing the final version, we were happy to see that most of the things that we designed are still there in spirit. Like, there might have been little tweaks, but the designs are there. So
that's awesome. It means that you were obviously you've made a good product, and then they've just put their spin on it.
Did something right. So.
Nice. This is a question from a guy, Jan Hay. He asks, will the box be similar to Warhammer Quest, or will we have some organization? Will the box have some nice organization ability in it?
It is an FFG box. I will just say that.
We're going to say this. We have not seen the final product. We're playing with prototype material. Like people might have seen at Gen Con. That's kind of the game we're playing with right now. And it's in a baggie. So we haven't seen the final box, but I've seen many FFG games, and they're all very similar. So that's what I would assume we would see.
Say no more. I guess if Terrinoth, Heroes of Terrinoth takes off, we might see the box to hold it all as an expansion. Who knows?
Yeah, one thing I keep looking at is I see one of the biggest sellers at FFG is the Arkham Horror LCG, and they start releasing those like storage boxes that are like options.
Exactly.
It's like, well, hey, if Heroes Turn Out does well, we can do some.
Shut up and take my money. Yeah. So we've kind of talked about expansions, and maybe you can comment on this or not. But are there any planned, or are they all ready to go kind of thing?
I guess we should have prefaced this at the beginning of the meeting, because I knew that, because most people want to ask that. That's the most important thing, because it's a double-edged sword about this game, where it's like we're super excited to see it come back in Terrinoth, but most people that are excited about it, they know Warhammer Quest, they've played Warhammer Quest, and all they want is more, and that's their only questions, like what's gonna be this game line. We'd love to know more. We'd love to talk about more. All we can say is that we have lots of ideas.
Of course.
We would love to do them, but FFG bases their schedule on how well games do. So our only suggestion is to buy the game, tell your friends to get the game, and make noise and show the games loved. And
it all comes down to numbers, really, because we're in communication with FFG. We don't work there, but we do have contacts still there. But obviously, beyond us just saying, hey, we have an idea, and we could send them an actual final idea. But even if they had all the stuff designed, it would sit there, on their desk, and until they had a slot in their schedule, they can't do much with it, obviously.
Of course.
So given our current situation, we have to give priority to projects that are real and happening, instead of just ones that we want to happen.
Dare to dream. Yeah.
No, but once we get the the call or whatever, we will hit the ground running, and we can have stuff designed fast. So that's not the issue. It's just a matter of how the game sells, if it does well, and if we get to see stuff in the future. So
perfect. So there's a chance, that's for sure. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about your experience with Warhammer Quest and its contrast to Heroes of Terrinoth, because your experience was quite unique. So you obviously worked on Warhammer Quest. It was, kind of your baby, if you will. How did it feel when the license was, due to licensing issue, the game just kind of came to a stop?
It was it was a struggle, because I think we've always had this, even though we love the IP, we loved GW and Warhammer Quest. There's always, like, as creators, we've always struggled with this whole licensing thing, because working with licensing is very tricky, and I understand the business perks of that,
Mm-hmm.
but we're people that we always create things. We want to create worlds, create
Mm-hmm.
IPs. So, given that licensing barrier, it's always been kind of a struggle and like almost like a concern.
Mm-hmm.
So there was like this weird sense of like, I don't want to say relief because obviously it wasn't a relief to see the game
No.
leave shelves. We wanted to see it continue on, but it was like, well, if that's going to happen, let's at least see what we can do to make this game work with something that won't go away like
Mm-hmm.
that, future. So obviously, it's pretty much a happy ending for us seeing this game in the form of Heroes of Terrinoth because there's so much more potential to expand
Mm-hmm.
now and do more with the game. So at the time, it was horrible. We
Yeah.
were like kind of devastated about it.
No
but
kidding.
Try to look at the bright side of things and deal with the hand we're dealt. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think also I think it made it worse is because it was kind of our first published co-design, and so it was like like, oh cool, this game got received very well, got good reviews, people seemed to really like it. We didn't know what was going to happen with it. We were like, it's the same situation now where it's like people were asking for expansions. We're like, we don't know. I mean, we'd
Yeah.
love to do them, but we don't know what's going to happen right now.
Mm-hmm.
In that unfortunate situation, there was just licensing stuff we didn't know about.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I mean, I know how licensing deals work. Like they are for a
Mm-hmm.
certain amount of time, and then they expire, and then you renew them if you want. And I'm guessing that they're just didn't want to renew it, so
Yeah.
that kind of just happened.
You got caught in the crossfire, sort of. Well, we can be, I mean, obviously it must be a breath of fresh air to know that licensing is not going to be an issue on the Heroes of Terrinoth, and now it's just based on quality and success. There's not this outside uncontrollable force that might show up.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
hopefully
I will say for people who are asking about expansions, I think the most reassurance I can give is like we're pretty confident the only reason FFG didn't get the feature it needed was because of the licensing. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't see any reason why there would not be a slew of expansions to follow the success of this game.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as the numbers prove beneficial, then
Yeah.
we expect more.
I'm right there with you. Yeah, I'm definitely. When Warhammer Quest was kind of coming to a close or whatever, did you have like more plans for it? Did you have things laid out before?
Oh yeah. We just internally between Adam and I, we had a whole campaign expansion idea
Right.
planned out. I mean, it wasn't something we had the green light from FFG. We just had our notes and kind of like it was almost put together during the waiting process of when we handed off Warhammer Quest until they actually released it.
Right.
So there was like I think it was almost a year time between those points.
yeah.
So
I mean, I'm pretty sure there's no reason to not discuss this because it's basically like us talking about fan content because it's not something we pitched to FFG or anything like that. But
Yeah.
we had this idea for a cool expansion that kind of focused more on the undead side of things. And like how you go to town, you have those 3 options.
Yeah.
Where you go, like we were like, oh, let's add more options. So I could add an option to go to a church and try to get a blessing, and then you take a blessing with you to your next mission, and like so it's like you're giving up one of those benefits of upgrading something by getting some awesome blessing,
Yeah.
which is very reminiscent to old Warhammer Quest.
Yeah.
So we had lots of ideas to kind of try to expand the campaign and do stuff like that. But obviously we just didn't put too much effort into it because we didn't sign a contract or anything. So.
And the expansions that did come out for Warhammer Quest, the Witch Hunter and Slayer, I mean, those things are selling for like $100 on eBay still. So people, they're sought after.
I don't even have those.
I know, and I could have bought them, and I don't know. I think I became one of those people. I was like, well, we'll see what else they're going to come out with, and then it's just like, I should have got them when I could have.
That's something too where I struggle with because I'm not a huge fan of PODs. I know why companies do them, especially FFG. They have a really solid way to produce this additional content at a reasonable price for both them and for the consumers.
Yeah.
But when I was in FFG, I worked on several print-on-demand expansions for Mansions of Madness, Gears of War. I designed the 2 Gears of War expansions plus the 2 Death Angel expansions. So those are cool. They're fun to work on. But I can't deny as a consumer I'd want to make those into actually boxed products, because just I'm a consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks great on a shelf. This is a question from Chris J. Davis. He's asking, what are the areas you felt were weakest with Warhammer Quest, and have you kind of like added or fixed them or changed them for Heroes of Terran?
I think the weakest for me was just the lack of one-off experiences. Like that's fixed completely in Heroes of Terrinoth.
And then some, yeah.
Yeah, I will say too that while it was part of our vision when we designed the game to have that campaign there, because that's what Warhammer Quest was back in the day, I feel like that was probably the weakest part of it, because you can only do so much with such a small box campaign.
Totally.
And you're also, like I said, you're locking up a lot of opponents for this campaign, where in Heroes of Terrinoth I feel like there's much more game there because you can play these 8 different adventures that feel totally different. So that was probably the weakest point, I think. I also didn't like some terminology things. Like, I don't like how there was no term for like minion. So in Warhammer Quest you saw a lot of non-nemesis enemy, and if you're ever playing the game and try to say that 3 times fast, it's really annoying.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
So like in Heroes of Terrinoth we added stuff like traits for, like, so you can exhaust a minion, you can exhaust, so stuff like that.
It makes sense. I remember having those exact conversations with people. Like, no, non-nemesis. Yeah, exactly.
I hated saying that so much.
Any release date on Heroes of Terrinoth?
They don't, like most people, we don't know, because FFG doesn't communicate release dates, not even internally really, because there's no way to verify exactly how shipping is going to go when it's on the boat. So we assume everything's going smoothly, it's on the boat, and we can only guess. Our best guess would be October and maybe November, but I feel like October is probably a good month to aim for when you're guessing. But it's something they don't ever, they don't.
Well, yeah. Even if they did tell us, like, we could tell you, and it might be late because the boat's late or tied up in customs. So it's like, we don't know, and our best guess is October.
Jeez,
I literally got a tweet during this interview. Someone I didn't know, and they were saying, "When does Heroes Turn Off shelves?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't work at FFG.
Yeah, between the expansion for Street Masters and then Heroes of Terrinoth, maybe October might be an expensive month. I'll have to start putting some money aside. I guess anything else that you guys want to add to the interview? Anything you feel like we missed?
No, I think I mean we're both just super excited for it. We're glad that there's so many people excited as well, and they're excited to see the future of this game, and the enthusiasm is really appreciated, even though it might seem kind of frustrating because we can't always answer the questions that people want to know the most, but it's we want to know the answers too, so we're right there with you.
on that topic, I mean, maybe I'll just talk real quick about Blacklist Games. Now, these you have made Street Masters with them, and also the Brook City game as well. Are those kind of, since you're one step away from Fantasy Flight, are those more, do you have more control over those, or those more?
Absolutely. We are totally involved the whole way. Like Street Masters was start to finish. Brook City was probably even more so, because we got it kind of contracted for Street Masters after some of the art started. But Brook City was our vision with the publisher. Like, let's do a cop game, let's make it like this. We kind of, and we work it toward the end. We're involved in all. We have to do the design and the development.
Right.
So it could be to the game's detriment sometimes, because we have to. We don't have all these other nice developers that are.
Yeah, we don't have a creative team. We essentially are the creative department for Blacklist Games, even though we're not exclusive to them. We function pretty much as their design team, their development team. And if Street Masters does well enough in October, then we might be able to be the full-time creative department, and that would free us up also from our our day job, so we can do more Heroes of Terrinoth too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I will say, people who tend to like our games, I think they would enjoy our games of Blacklist, because it's kind of like, I think I've said this before to somebody, where I've said it's more like unfiltered Sadler. Like, this is the game we design games that we want to play with Blacklist. So and it's all of our whole vision. So I think that people that like our games would probably like Blacklist games.
And one of the main discussions I see a lot popping up around like Warhammer Quest and some of the other games are just the solo ability of it, because solo gaming is such a big thing. And I'm a huge solo gamer. I play pretty much my entire collection. I'll play solo, when I don't have somebody around. But even with Warhammer Quest, you're still controlling 2 characters when you're solo. But both of our, Brook City and Street Masters, if you play solo, you're just playing as one character, and it's completely scalable from 1 to 4 players.
So it's less of a, let's just make a one-player thing work. It's like, it's designed, there is a one-player thing. And that's a big difference. There's no doubt about that. So if people... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And going off of that, one major thing too is I love having no exceptions to playing solo, because a lot of games will have these solo rules where games were just with Blacklist. The rules are all the same depending on if you're playing with 1 or 4 players. It doesn't change any core rules at all.
That's awesome.
Yeah, With Heroes of Terrinoth and Warhammer Quest, I'll say the handicap for solo is because of the 8 action, which I love because it promotes cooperation like mechanically, which is really cool. But that mechanic alone makes it so you have to have at least 2 heroes in the game.
Of course, yeah, you can't aid yourself. It's good job, me. Yeah. So people who like the Sadler stuff, Blacklist Games is something they should keep their eye on, and in fact, they might find some hidden gems they may not have known about. So I'll definitely put a link to that in the description below.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
Cool.
Yeah,
so,
they definitely do not have the marketing outreach that companies like FFG have.
No, yeah, totally. So these are the Sadler brothers, the creative minds behind Heroes of Terrinoth, which is coming out soon from Fantasy Flight Games. And if you liked Warhammer Quest, check it out. And if you like Heroes of Terrinoth, maybe check out the Street Masters Kickstarter in October. Thank you so much for joining me here. That's what a wealth of information. So nice to talk to you guys.
Thanks for having
me. Man. Yep,
Cheers.
thanks.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider supporting the channel by liking the video, leaving a comment below, or even subscribing to the channel. Until next video, I'll see you then. Thank you.